The knock came exactly 1 year after my best friend died, and when I opened the door, his widow was standing there holding a small, battered wooden box against her chest. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying, and before I could even ask why she had come, she whispered, "I need to tell you what Daniel asked me to do before he died." My heart seemed to stop. Daniel had been gone for 12 months, but in that instant, every memory of him came rushing back. The ridiculous jokes, the late-night phone calls, the promises we made when we were young enough to believe nothing could ever separate us. I stepped aside and let Sarah in, unaware that the box she carried contained something that would change the way I understood my best friend forever. Before we continue, if stories about friendship, second chances, unexpected kindness, and the promises people leave behind touch your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness for more emotional stories about second chances. It truly helps this channel grow and allows these stories to reach people who may need them. Daniel and I had been friends since college. We met during a miserable rainstorm when the university parking lot flooded, and I accidentally stepped into a puddle deep enough to soak both shoes. Daniel laughed so hard that he nearly dropped the stack of books he was carrying. Instead of walking away, he gave me his dry jacket and spent the next hour helping me find a place where I could dry my clothes. That was Daniel. He noticed people. He remembered birthdays, called when someone sounded tired, and somehow knew when a person was pretending to be okay. Over the years, we became brothers in everything but blood. We celebrated jobs, weddings, birthdays, failures, and the quiet victories nobody else noticed. When Daniel married Sarah, I gained another friend. She understood the strange rhythm of our friendship and never complained when Daniel and I disappeared for an afternoon to repair an old motorcycle or watch a game together. They built a modest life in a small house with a red front door, a garden Sarah loved, and a kitchen where Daniel claimed he could cook anything, despite burning almost everything he touched. Their marriage wasn't perfect, but it was real. They argued, apologized, laughed, worried about bills, dreamed about vacations, and loved each other through ordinary days. I admired that more than I ever told them. Then Daniel became sick. At first, he complained about being tired. He blamed work, long hours, and getting older. But the tiredness grew until even climbing the stairs left him breathless. The diagnosis came like a door slamming shut. Cancer. The doctors tried everything they could, but within months, Daniel's world became hospital rooms, medications, scans, and whispered conversations. I visited whenever I could. Sometimes we talked for hours. Other times I simply sat beside his bed while the machines hummed in the darkness. I wanted to be brave for him, but there were nights when I drove home and cried before I even reached my driveway. Daniel never wanted anyone to pity him. One evening, while rain tapped against the hospital window, he looked at me and said that if he didn't make it, I had to promise him something. I immediately told him not to talk like that. He smiled and said I was still terrible at listening. Then he told me that Sarah would need people after he was gone, not just during the funeral, but afterward, when everyone else returned to their normal lives. He made me promise that I would check on her. Not every day. Not in a way that made her feel helpless. Just enough to remind her she wasn't alone. I promised. Daniel died 3 weeks later. The funeral was crowded, but afterward, everything became painfully quiet. People brought food to Sarah's house, hugged her, said they were sorry, and slowly disappeared back into their own lives. I tried to keep my promise. I called Sarah every few days at first. Sometimes she answered. Sometimes she didn't. I dropped groceries at her door and sent messages when I knew she had difficult appointments or lonely anniversaries approaching. But grief has a strange way of making ordinary kindness feel like an accusation. Sarah once told me she hated people asking if she was doing better, because she didn't know what better was supposed to look like. Eventually, she stopped answering altogether. I didn't know what to do. I worried that I was becoming intrusive, so I gave her space. Months passed. I continued living, working, paying bills, meeting friends, and pretending I had accepted Daniel's death. But every time I saw a motorcycle like his, every time I heard a song we used to play, something inside me tightened. I had lost my best friend, and I had also failed to find a way to keep the promise I made to him. Then, exactly 1 year after Daniel's funeral, Sarah appeared at my door. She sat at my kitchen table with the wooden box between us. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she pushed it toward me. Inside was an old photograph of Daniel and me from college, a key, several handwritten letters, and a sealed envelope with my name written across it in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting. My hands began shaking. Sarah told me she had found the box behind a loose board in Daniel's old workshop. He had hidden it there months before his death. The box contained instructions for her, but she had been unable to open it until the first anniversary of his death. Daniel had specifically asked her to wait 1 year before giving it to me. I stared at the envelope for what felt like an eternity before opening it. Daniel's letter wasn't long. He wrote that he knew I would try to help Sarah, but he also knew me well enough to understand that I would probably mistake helping someone for carrying their pain myself. He told me not to rescue her. He told me to remind her that she was capable of rebuilding her life. Then came the sentence that broke me: if she ever stops letting you in, don't stop believing there is still a door somewhere. Sarah began crying. Then she told me the truth. She hadn't stopped answering because she was angry with me. She had stopped because every time I called, she heard Daniel's voice in my memory. She saw his face in mine. She thought that if she let me become part of her life again, she would somehow be betraying him by learning how to live without him. Then she handed me the key. It belonged to a small storage unit Daniel had rented before he became seriously ill. We went together the next morning. Inside was a collection of things Daniel had saved over the years: our old photographs, Sarah's childhood drawings, boxes of letters, his motorcycle helmet, and a battered guitar he hadn't played since college. But in the corner stood something neither of us expected: a workbench covered with tools and unfinished wooden toys. Sarah looked at me in confusion. I remembered Daniel once telling me that he wanted to build something for children someday. He had always dreamed about creating toys and donating them to families who couldn't afford gifts. He never had enough time to begin. Except he had. There were dozens of unfinished wooden cars, puzzles, little houses, and animals. Some were sanded smooth. Others were only rough blocks of wood. Daniel had apparently worked on them quietly during the months when he knew his illness might take him. Sarah touched one of the tiny wooden cars and began sobbing. That was when I understood the real purpose of the box. Daniel hadn't left us money. He hadn't left some dramatic secret that would magically fix our lives. He had left us unfinished work. He wanted us to finish it. Over the following months, Sarah and I began meeting every Saturday in the workshop. At first, we barely spoke. We simply worked. She painted the toys while I sanded them. Slowly, the silence became comfortable. Then came small jokes. Then stories about Daniel. Then laughter. We finished the first 20 toys and donated them to a children's shelter before Christmas. Sarah eventually started working again. She planted flowers in the garden Daniel had once neglected. She began taking photographs, something she had loved before marriage but had abandoned because life became so busy. And one afternoon, she told me she had finally stopped feeling guilty for laughing. I knew then that Daniel's final request had worked. He hadn't asked me to replace him. He had asked me to help Sarah find the courage to keep living. A year after that first knock, Sarah and I stood in the same workshop, surrounded by wooden toys and sawdust. On the wall hung a photograph of Daniel laughing beside that ridiculous old motorcycle. Sarah looked at it and smiled. She told me she finally understood why he had waited until the anniversary to bring us together. He knew grief needed time. But he also knew grief wasn't supposed to become a home. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who may be carrying a quiet loss, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Sometimes one small act of kindness can become the reason someone finds a second chance at life. And before we say goodbye, I want you to leave a special comment. Love can leave a light behind. Write it below if you believe the people we lose can still inspire the lives we continue living. I still miss Daniel. Some days, I miss him so much that it feels like the first morning after his funeral. But now, when I think of him, I don't only remember the hospital bed or the final goodbye. I remember the unfinished toys, Sarah's first real laugh after losing him, and the promise he trusted me enough to keep. Daniel taught me something I will never forget. Sometimes the greatest gift a person leaves behind isn't something you can hold. It's a reason to keep going. And sometimes, the people we lose don't really disappear. They simply become part of the kindness we pass on.